Let's queue all of this up. The next question is from BD. How much of performance impact is IK calculation on net 9? And with upcoming IK changes, is there any thought of transmitting computed bone poses instead of running IK on all the clients? So with net 9, I don't actually have like the data on hand, because I don't have like specific profiling data with net 9 specifically. I did profile the IK like several times in the past. It does have like some impact. It's not as slow as like some people think. Like generally can do IK relatively fast. However, there is like one aspect of it, and I'm actually gonna grab a brush. There is like one aspect of it that's not actually the IK itself that's causing a slowdown, and it's sort of the interactions with the data model. Because when the IK works, what it has to do, it has to like read out like, data from the data model and has to write it back. And one of the issues, let me just grab my brush. One of the issues is like, like if you go into a profile, you will see like, for example, IK is being executed. And this is, IK. I cannot write it backwards, so I'm just gonna do this. I'm also gonna move it like this. So you have like your IK, and then like the IK does like a whole bunch of stuff. It does like lots of different operations, and some of these are like writing to the data model. So you have like, you have the data model. I'm just gonna write data and put it here. So you have the data model, and it's, sort of interacting with that in some of the phases, and it's one of the things that actually kind of slows it down. It's one of the things we also do want to optimize. We kind of want to like make the data model more efficient for recurrent operations, like things that just run every single frame, because right now the data model, it tracks when things change, and the tracking, like especially when there's a lot of interactions in every frame, that adds up. And it like when you look at it, a profile or with like a flame graph, it'll look like, the IK kind of balance up, but it's actually like accumulating lots of these kind of interactions with the data model. And this kind of makes the IK kind of look bigger than it is. Optimizing this, like, it would kind of like reduce a lot of that overhead. So that would also help. But just to switch to net 9, it makes those interactions faster, way faster. It makes the math calculations faster. So that kind of helps a lot, just on its own with the existing code, but there's still like, room for improvement. Right now we don't really have like any plans to do it like networked, because I don't believe it is necessary, because there's like a lot of other things that can be done as well, like one of them being, variable rate updates, which is another like, performance optimizations we want to make in the future, where some systems will update at slower rate than others. So say for example, I have my own IK, I'm kind of like moving and so on. I want it to be match my frame rate. So that needs to update every single frame. And if somebody like is near me, maybe it also needs to update, like I want it to be smooth. But say there's a person, who's over distance and over there, or maybe like in there over there, I don't need to see them at the same fidelity, because I can, barely see them. Maybe I don't see them at all. So the system will be able to like lower the rate at which their IK updates, proportionally, to how far away they are, or like, how you cannot see them, and it'll help, reduce the load. The other things we want to do with the data model, we'll be able to execute the IK in parallel, using like multi-threading for it, which is going to help even more, because right now the interactions with the data model, they need to be synchronized, which makes it so you can really run it super well, multi-threaded. There is actually a system that like end up like being multi-threaded, which is the dynamic bones. All of the simulation of the dynamic bones, all the heavy math heavy stuff, is multi-threaded. However, what is really funny is like you can actually even look at it yourself. If I go to the debug dialog and I look at the focused world, there's like a bunch of statistics. Actually, no, it's under physics. The dynamic bones, there's total update time for me. It's like half a millisecond. The simulation is hovering around 0.20 milliseconds, and then the finish is around 0.20 milliseconds. The finish part is literally just taking all the computed values and copying them back to the data model. That's taking the same amount of time as the just all the mods have a simulation, which kind of shows how much overhead that has. Which means that's something that like the multi-threading, it helps because it takes like less compute time, but it's still like that finished part where it has to write the results back. That's what ends up like kind of slowing it down instead of like needs some of the data model kind of changes. But just by switching to the .9, that code runs way faster. Like it's able to generate much better machine code. So that just bumps it into performance. But there's a lot of like things that we can still do to help improve the performance and make it so you can just compute the IK like locally. Because if you do start transferring over network, you increase how much bandwidth is necessary. You also introduce some effects like where maybe like it needs to be smoothed, and like you don't get like much of a precision in the movement, which are kind of downsides. So we would like to avoid those if possible. And I do believe they are possible because like with the right systems at hand, like your machine should be able to run IK for like hundreds or thousands of like users. Like there's like if it's like optimized really well. There's a lot of games that like that do this kind of thing. So the combination of like faster runtime, and then like in the data model improvements and the multi-threading for the actual computations, I think that'll make it so we don't need to do it networked. Next questions. Also, one more thing I'm gonna mention is like if any of this is also kind of subject to change. So like if like it seems like even with all of that, it would be beneficial to network it, we would eventually decide to do that. But unless we have like a solid reason to do that, like and we exhaust the other possible approaches, like I don't think we'll go for that kind of thing.